in areas of new product development, design of new services, process innovation, and market research with more than 45 years of B2B consulting experience. And yet he's only 26. He is, nobody believes me. He is the author of several award-winning papers and a highly sought-after speaker at both public and private conferences on voice of the customer, innovation, and new product development. He's also a highly regarded teacher, trainer, and coach. I personally learned VOC from Gerry, and he has lectured frequently at business schools at MIT, University of Pennsylvania, Chicago, Dartmouth, Carnegie Mellon, Cornell, Northwestern, and Harvard. Joining him is Kristyn Corrigan. Kristyn is principal and co-owner of Applied Marketing Science, a Boston-based market research consultancy that helps companies develop better products and services, harnessing the power of customer insights. In her nearly 2 decades of product development consulting experience, Kristyn has led and designed customer insights engagements for leading global B2B companies and consumer brands. She specializes in helping companies understand stated and latent customer needs and how to measure their criticality to innovation. Her published work has been featured in Fast Company and Marketing News. She's a contributing author to the 2023 textbook, The Product Development Management Association Handbook of Innovation and New Product Development. Joining them from Northwestern University is Artem Timoshenko. Artem is an assistant professor of marketing at Kellogg, and he develops and applies quantitative methods to improve marketing practice and product development. Professor Timoshenko's research relies on field experiments and proof of concept studies with close industry collaborations. His recent work covers retail, financial services, automotive, and technology industries with a focus on market strategy, analytics, and customer insights. He holds a PhD in marketing from MIT Sloan and an MA in economics from the Economic School, and a diploma in applied ethics and computer science from Moscow State University. So the 3 of you all, come on up. And Lori's going to give us your slides. And you still have your same finish line.
Okay. You go first?
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Lynn. I can recall, I think it was our last members meeting before COVID, which was held at Millikan in South Carolina. And in the introductory part of the conference, Lynn said, should we just go around and tell us interesting things that you might be working on? And I mentioned that my company was working on an application of artificial intelligence in voice of the customer research. And there was a fair amount of excitement in the room. I remember Bob Cooper running up and saying, I got to get a copy of that paper. And we got it for him. And we waited a few years, and I remember Lynn saying, well, this might make an interesting topic for a conference, for one of our next members meetings. So here we are, we've come full circle. You probably know me as the person who teaches voice of the customer for ISBM. Many of you have taken our workshop. And there's an interesting parallel in how we do VOC and what we're going to talk about today. This is really the famous paper that created the field of voice of the customer. It coined the term. It was published in Marketing Science in 1993. And the 2 authors are John Hauser, who's a very prominent marketing professor at the MIT Sloan School, and a woman by the name of Abby Griffin, who was a doctoral student of his in the late 1980s. She decided, John was her thesis advisor, and her doctoral dissertation was a study of how companies go about understanding customer needs in support of innovation, development of new products, new services, et cetera. She won the thesis prize at MIT that year. And so she and John decided to turn it into a journal paper. And this was the paper that resulted. It really coined the term, created the field that we all use today. It's been around now for 30 years. And Abby, of course, is one of our research fellows here at ISBM and a very prominent professor at the University of Utah. Well, history has a way of repeating itself. That gentleman over there is Artem Timoshenko, who also was a graduate student at MIT Sloan under John Hauser. And his doctoral dissertation was this application of AI in trying to understand customer needs. And so, interesting parallel. and we'll proceed here. So today's agenda, I'm going to start off just saying a few general things about voice of the customer and its unique problems within B2B companies. Then Artem is going to come on and talk about his initial research and what really became his doctoral dissertation and a paper just like Abby's paper. Then Kristyn Corrigan, my colleague for many years at AMS, is going to talk about what you have to do in practice and show a couple of case studies in applying this technology. And then finally, Artem will come back on and talk about where things are going from here and how ChatGPT is entering into the newer version, or let's say updated versions of this. Okay, so I think we all agree voice of the customer has become an accepted and acknowledged best practice and has been around for a while. Now, Griffin and Hauser were very careful to define what is a customer need. And in a phrase, they define it as a need is simply the benefit to be sought by the customer. Then she goes on to say it has nothing to do with the way in which that benefit is satisfied. It's not the feature, it's not the solution, it's not the specification, it's simply the need that underlies those things. And that's a very important distinction, because one of the most important principles in VOC is that needs and solutions should never be confused. They're two different things. And unfortunately, customers like to talk about features and solutions and specifications, and it usually requires a human interviewer to be able to probe them to get to the real underlying need. So this was a problem that artificial intelligence is going to have to deal with, because if customers are speaking in solutions and there's no interviewer, somehow we have to teach these large language models to recognize what is a need and what is a solution or not a need. Now, two other things that Griffin and Hauser talk about is that needs are situation-based and can differ depending on the application or the situation. And that not all customers are the same, so we have to think about who we're going to talk to. I contend that one of the biggest mistakes that companies make in doing voice of the customer is that they go and talk to the same people they always talk to, namely their key accounts, and they don't learn a lot new. So this idea of getting a cross-section of customers is a problem in executing VOC. The one thing that I think is irrefutable is that companies that do a better job satisfying unmet needs or poorly met needs are usually the winners in their category. If I had to generalize how you achieve success, I think that phrase says it better than anything else. Find the unmet need and satisfy it better than whoever you're competing with. Okay, unfortunately, the term voice of the customer has been pulled and stretched and misdefined badly over the last 30 years. To the naive, it's just, well, anytime you talk to a customer, that's voice of the customer. Griffin and Hauser had a much more narrow meaning in mind here. But some of the ways that we see the term misdefined is, I've already made the case, it's not the solution, it's not the feature, it's not the technical spec. A big mistake that engineers make is they want the customer to hand them the spec. And customers are not very good at that, just as they are not all that good at ideation or inventing new features, et cetera. In a lot of industries, they rely on the opinions of experts or luminaries. The medical device companies make this mistake in spades. They assemble this high-paid group of leading gastroenterologists or cardiac surgeons, and they rely on them for their voice of the customer. The evidence has shown is that's a way of dropping a lot of money very quickly. It's not really a very good source for voice of the customer. It's a piece of it, but not everything. Other firms rely on anecdotes that come in from the sales force or from tech support. Problem with that is salespeople are by definition short-term oriented. They ought to be. They have to worry about making their numbers this year. The other problem is what I called in a paper a few years ago, the tyranny of key accounts. What always happens is, a hard-driving sales rep comes in, pounds his fist on the table and says, God damn it, my customer says we need to do this, and if we do this, everything will be great, we'll sell a gazillion units, and everybody in the company says, yeah, we can sell it to other people too. Sadly, it rarely happens, and I can't tell you how many companies I've been to where their entire product development organization, R&D, engineering, they're all eaten alive by custom one-off projects for individual key accounts. So that I see as a huge trap. And finally, some people say, well, innovation's easy. We just watch what the competition does and we do the same thing. Okay, you can be a fast follower. That's a business strategy. They're rarely the leaders in their field. All right, so let's go back to Griffin and Hauser. They lay out voice of the customer as a process that should be done in 3 phases. The first is identifying customer wants and needs. The second is what we call affinitization, which is simply a grouping of needs to try to reduce complexity. It's the exercise of putting yellow stickers on the wall and organizing them into groups that go together. And then finally, you have to prioritize. Unfortunately, this is a step that is too often skipped by people who do VOC. Now, everything we're going to talk about here has to do with this first phase. The second and third are relatively easy and quick, but in the first phase, there's a lot of complexity, a lot of decisions to make. And so here's where we thought AI might have an application. Now, I don't know about you, I took my first marketing course as a very young man in 1968, and there was the mantra that we all heard, better, faster, cheaper. You gotta have at least 2 out of 3 to have a winner, and 3 out of 3, you're probably gonna have a slam dunk. No guarantees, lots of exceptions, but better, faster, cheaper. So when we started contemplating, when we first heard about this stuff going on at MIT, I think back in 2015, we started contemplating, well, where might this help? Well, better. Human bias is always a problem in any kind of market research, including VOC. Faster, well, maybe we can skip all those pesky interviews. They're fun, but boy, they take a lot of time and a lot of effort. Cheaper, well, there's user-generated content out there that's virtually free. And it's enormous. I mean, we all know this. There's all the reviews online and the blogs and the discussion and it's just enormous. So we started off thinking, well, maybe there's something here. And then we went on and we thought, gee, AI could be more complete because we could get content from thousands of people instead of the usual maybe 20 to 40 people we interview in a typical VOC. It's going to be easier because we're going to let the machine do the heavy work, and it's going to be more relevant because most user-generated content is posted right at the moment of truth. You check out of the hotel, you had a bad experience, you respond to one of those little surveys and you post, or you post a review and you slam them. And so we thought, oh boy, there's a lot going on here. So this question is, how can artificial intelligence help with this whole area of needs identification? Now, the way the qualitative, that first phase of VOC is executed, as laid out in Griffin and Hauser, is 4 parts. Customer interviews. They make a big deal and they show empirically that it's better to record, transcribe, and analyze the interviews from a transcript rather than the typical note-taking that most people were doing at the time. Okay, so when we started thinking about this, we thought, well, here's where the action is, in the interview, because maybe we'll be able to use sources either in addition to traditional VOC interviews or other than to come up with those need statements. That's what we were thinking of early on. Now, us old-timers were a little skeptical because there were going to be 2 big problems here. The first is that, as I think I said earlier, good VOC, to do it really well, often requires a human interviewer who can do probing to get people beyond their discussion of features and solutions and specifications. And user-generated content does not have the ability to do that follow-on probing. The other problem is our practice is 80% B2B. And the world of user-generated content is dominated by consumer products. Boy, you can get millions of young moms to talk about caring for infants or dog owners to talk about how they take care of their dog. But I don't think there are a lot of plant managers that just kind of go on at night and blog about, hey, here's the problem we're having in our factory, blah, blah, blah. People have trade secrets. So we were a little skeptical. Artem was thinking about it in a bigger way. because he was thinking not just about user-generated content, but also about proprietary content. And Kristyn's going to talk about that a little bit too. He was also talking about the back half here, because someone's got to read all those transcripts and extract need statements from them. That's by far the most work-intensive, manpower-intensive part of the VOC process. And he was thinking about being able to save that labor and let the machine do it. So now we might be able to use AI not just to supplement the content, but then to go through and do the heavy lifting of reading these transcripts to extract the information. So that's the challenge here. How can companies take advantage of this fantastic new technology that we've been talking about all day and seen some amazing applications of it, and make the process of understanding needs, voice of the customer, more efficient and faster and easier. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Artem, and he'll talk about it.
Right, thanks, Gerry. It's funny. When I graduated from the PhD program at MIT, I went for the road tour around the universities. I was presenting my work about VOC and using AI for VOC. And I think Gerry's presentation is so much better than what I had. I mean, I should have asked you to come up with some slides for me. It would be so helpful. All right, so my name is Artem Timoshenko. I'm an assistant professor of marketing at Kellogg School of Management, just 15 minutes from here. For those of you traveling out of town, welcome to Chicago. I'm also an affiliate, I'm a research affiliate at MIT. And a lot of my research collaborations are still happening at MIT. So some of my work, and I've been working in this area for the last 7 years. A lot of my work is focused on using AI for product development. And so the project that I want to talk about is, Gerry introduced it already, and this is exactly in this area. How we can use machine learning to improve identifying customer insights, how we can use AI to supplement some of the human effort and improve voice of the customer study. Okay, so the initial research that we conducted, we actually focused on the oral care product category. And we'll talk later about how that applies to the B2B situations, but I will start with the oral care. So when you think about oral care, Jason, let me ask you a question. When you think about oral care, what are the customer needs that come to mind?
Fresh breath.
Fresh breath. What else?
Anti-cavity.
Okay, whiter teeth would be helpful.
Yep, whiter teeth.
Healthier gums. So when we start talking to the customers about what are the different customer needs for the oral care product category, a lot of people would be coming up with customer needs like that. But when you start going deeper and interview customers about their experience in a more complex way, and about different stages of the customer journey and about their experience more generally, apparently there are quite a lot of different customer needs. So some customers would be talking about whiter teeth, but some customers might be saying, you know, I want oral care products that fit my bathroom decor. Or I want oral care products that I'm traveling a lot, so I need oral care products with packaging that allows me to travel easier and more conveniently. That would be nice, right? So when we start talking to the customers, and AMS did this analysis professionally for one of their clients, for oral care products, they identified about 86 different customer needs. And those customer needs, I mean, things like able to make my teeth look whiter, yeah, everybody understands that. But some of the things which are more nuanced, this is hugely, hugely helpful for product development. So this analysis was done based on 86 customer needs we identified based on the experiential interviews and focus groups. And when we were thinking about this research initially, experiential interviews and focus groups, and I think even now, this is considered to be gold standard for voice of the customer studies. So we conduct experiential interviews and focus groups. But when we think about oral care, I mean, there is just so much content online, right? We might be thinking about online reviews, we might be thinking about social media data, we might be thinking about professional forums, all these different things that we could look into. Does this content actually contain any helpful information that would help us to elicit some of the customer insights and help our product development? So we've done this study, and together with AMS, we collected a huge database of online reviews from Amazon. It's like thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of reviews. And there were hundreds of thousands of reviews just for the oral care products. It's just impossible to read all of that. It's just impossible to process. How can machine learning help us with that? And does this content actually contain any information? So the first thing that we've done, we randomly sampled about 10,000 Amazon reviews. We carefully reviewed them and said, well, what are the customer needs that are contained there? Let's compare these customer needs to the ones that we identified in the interviews and focus groups. And what we can see is that, well, 74 of the customer needs that we found in experiential interviews and focus groups were also identified in a fairly small sample of Amazon reviews. I mean, 10,000 reviews is a huge sample, but it's fairly small compared to what we have online. In addition to that, there were some customer needs, 8 customer needs, that we didn't find in experiential interviews initially. So these are the things that are completely new to the company, and it would be helpful to know them, when we think about the customer insights and product development. Some of the things were quite unusual, like I want oral care products that help me quit smoking. Interesting. But you might be thinking about those types of needs because this is what gives you inspiration for product development. So this was done based on 10,000 reviews, and we have a huge corpus, right? If you go beyond these 10,000 reviews, we would be even, potentially we would identify even more customer needs, right? It's just a small sample of it. So we wanted to use machine learning, we wanted to use AI to help us identify customer needs from a large volume of online content. How can we do that? I want to give you just a little bit of intuition about how the methods work. But to do that, I would actually want you to consider this online review. This is a review from Amazon. Some customer wrote it. It's very typical of what customers write on Amazon. So the customer says, I replaced an old toothbrush with a new one, but the description doesn't say that this model no longer has a 30-second timer. The brush shuts off after 2 minutes, but the 30-second timer is missing. I would not have purchased this product at all if I knew. Okay. So when we look at this customer review, one thing that we recognize is, well, what is the customer need that the customer is talking about, right? What is the underlying benefit that customer is trying to obtain from this product? What are they complaining about? And so the customer need here is, I know the right amount of time to spend on each step of my oral care routine. When you see this customer need, right, you might think about different solutions. It's not necessarily a 30-second timer. You might play with different types of approaches. So the engineering component here might be different. But this customer need gives you this initial idea of what are the things that customers really care about. This customer need is also not just it doesn't just paraphrase what the customer says. It's really conceptual understanding of what customer is trying to obtain here, right? It's really the conceptual understanding of the benefits. The second thing that I would like to highlight with this review is that if our goal is to identify those customer needs, we don't really need to spend our time reading the whole thing. We recognize that the first 2 sentences are kind of communicating the same message. And the last sentence, it says something, I would not have purchased this product if I had known. I mean, it says something about the sentiment, it says something about how strongly the customer feels about this customer need, but it doesn't really help us formulate those customer needs. So if our goal is to identify customer insights, all we need to do is to review the second sentence. So this is the core idea of the approach that we designed together at AMS a few years ago. Basically, the idea is we will use machine learning for what machine learning is really helpful, and we will use human judgment to what human judgment is really helpful. Experts in the area, people who know about the product, they're much better in understanding what customers really looking for, even if they didn't think about this insight before. I mean, they're still much better in understanding and relating to the customer experience and formulating what are the underlying benefits the customer is talking about. At the same time, humans will never have enough time in the world to review all Amazon reviews or look through the social media data. No way. So we can use machine learning to help us with that. Basically, the core idea of the approach is we use machine learning to screen the vast amount of online content and tell us, well, here are a few different and important examples of customer needs. Look at them, apply your judgment, formulate customer insights, and you don't need to bother about everything else. So this was the key idea of the approach. We conducted a fairly rigorous evaluation of this approach. It was quite an involved study, and that's why it's published in an academic journal at the end. A few observations. One, we found that online content is really helpful. And I'm talking about online reviews for oral care products, but obviously when we are talking about B2B applications, well, we might be thinking about professional forums, we might be thinking about call center data. The source of the content here is the second order issue. we found that AI helped us to identify insights more efficiently, right? We cannot review, we cannot look through all Amazon reviews, we cannot look through all social media data, and machine learning can help us with that. It can help us to winnow down the content, look at and focus our effort on the content that we really need to look at. One thing that we found out is that, well, if you think about experiential interviews, typically a good interviewer would make the customers discuss very different areas, right? So if someone talked about part of the experience and we see that another customer is talking about a similar experience, the experienced interviewer would actually navigate away the conversation and focus on some other parts of the customer journey and some kind of other parts of customer experience, right? So that happens often with experiential interviews. That is not what happens in online content. In online content, people would be talking about exactly the same problem with the product over and over again. They would be hitting each other. And so machine learning can help with that. Machine learning can say, well, all this pack of information, 70% of the things are talking about like one or two customer insights, the same customer insights. So let's spread our attention, let's look at different parts of content. And that helps us with identifying rare insights, right? So things which are less obvious and less frequently mentioned by the customers, that's where we can put more effort on. Make sense? Yes.
Just a quick question related to that. Are you finding people are not mentioning things that would be considered cost of entry, things that might seem obvious?
So that happens sometimes. So some of the customer needs, they're just kind of obvious, but a lot of things will be just less frequently mentioned. You know, just people. So an interesting thing that we had in this study, we looked at how frequently people mention things, and then if we conduct surveys, how important these things are for the people. And we find zero correlation. So it's not like people don't mention things that are not important to them. Some things are not often mentioned. It might be that a lot of people really care about oral care products that help them quit smoking, but they just don't write about it. All right, so we conducted this study about 5-6 years ago, and since then, AMS had a lot of experience applying these methods in various contexts, in various B2B contexts, including different types of data, different types of application, and I will let Kristyn to talk about that.
Thank you, Artem. Yeah, so I'm going to talk about 2 case studies and practical applications of this method from a research perspective. And let me say that AMS, we do a lot of voice of customer research. Sometimes it can be done using machine learning and online content. Other times there still is a need for one-on-one interviews or even ethnographic research. Today we're going to focus, of course, on the AI and machine learning aspect of this. Now there's a number of potential data sources that we have that are external. In B2B, of course, the data can be harder to come by. Many professional forums, increasingly we're using sources like Reddit and Discourse. The beautiful thing about the methodology is that you can have text data from a number of different types of sources, and the algorithm, the machine is able to analyze all of that data for customer needs, regardless of the type of source. There's also proprietary data that we've been using increasingly. So companies will have CRM systems where maybe they'll have notes about customer interactions. They'll have customer service call logs recorded. We can use those transcripts. They may have customer satisfaction surveys where there's open-ended responses that nobody ever reads. Can we put that into a VOC study and actually extract the needs from that data? Let's look at the process in more detail. So whenever we're asking ourselves the question, can we use machine learning for voice of customer? The first step is always to identify those sources of information. And in B2B, it can be very challenging, right? So we'll always ask our clients, where are your customers talking? That may be internal sources I mentioned, like call center data or survey data, but it's also in forums on social medias and blog comments, article comments. So we'll go through and we'll look for data sources. Once we have that text data, our next step is to train the algorithm. And essentially what we're doing is we're taking a subset of that text data and we're going through each line, usually it's on the order of 200 or so phrases, and we're asking the question, is this informative content or is it not? So for the purposes of voice of customer, is it a customer need somewhere in that line of text or is it not? So we go through and we train the algorithm, we run the machine, that's the quick part, right? And then the machine outputs the data to us. And so the best way to think about this is if you were to review that machine learning data output file, usually it's on the range of 1,000 or so phrases, you will understand the totality of the massive amount of text that you put into the algorithm in the first place. So it's a huge time saver because you can be confident that when you review that subset of text data, that you haven't missed any of the needs and the tens or hundreds of thousands of lines of text that you've put into the machine. Okay, so we have our analysts review the output on the back end and put together the insight stories, similar to what you would do with traditional VOC data. Okay, so you really have the heavy lifting of the research team and the front end of the process and the identifying of the sources and the training of the algorithm. And then on the back end, as we're looking at the data from the exercise. What you need to make it work. So if you're thinking, can I use this in my category? You want a lot of data, right? If there's not a lot of text data, you can go ahead and read it yourself. If you have over 2,000 sentences, you can use the algorithm. The sentences need to be substantive. In other words, we want to have content where customers are talking about their needs. If they're merely just talking about their satisfaction or their sentiment, it's not as useful because we don't have that VOC information. So we want to make sure that it has substance, that it's rich, and that it's text-based. We heard today that there's many other efforts going on looking at video or images. That's not this process. This process involves reviewing text data. And when we think about the applications of the process, since 2017, when we partnered with Artem and the folks at MIT, we've had a lot of successful uses of it. I'm going to talk about two in just a minute. Of course, in VOC and understanding and identifying the customer needs for innovation, but also if companies are thinking about adjacencies, if they're looking to do research on how competitors are performing or how customers are talking about various brands, if they want to track market trends or how needs are evolving over time, this is a really great way to do it. We've also used it to make more effective product claims. So companies want impactful claims in advertising and on packaging. We've used machine learning to identify those as well. Okay, so a B2B example here. We have snow plows and snow removal. Yes, winter is coming. I live in Boston, so I live this for several months out of the year. But we had a case a couple years ago. It was a client. I can name the client in this case. I have this permission. So this client was Douglas Dynamics, and they're a major manufacturer of snow equipment, leading manufacturer. And they wanted to do some VOC research. They wanted to trial the machine learning methodology because they were looking to do next generation product development. They were also looking to refine their marketing messaging. So what we did is we first identified the sources of where people were talking. And I have to admit, when they first approached us to do this project, I said, there's no way machine learning is going to be a good fit for this. We're going to have to do interviews. I was wrong. There are a lot of forums where people are talking in detail about snow plowing as well as social media. So I see people nodding. You guys have these sources for your industries as well. We were able to extract 21,000 sentences, and we were able to develop a very comprehensive set of customer needs. In this case, it was 117 needs. And now when we talk about these blogs and forums, you may think that, okay, people are talking about the technical issues they're having with their product. The needs aren't going to be experiential. They're only going to be focused on these very technical aspects of the product. Well, that was wrong too. People were talking about their experiences plowing, the supplies they needed to have on them, right? Other needs around customer service and not necessarily the technicalities of the product. So we were pleased with the comprehensiveness of the needs and also the ability to rerun the machine again down the road. So inevitably, when you do a VOC study, sometimes these more detailed questions come up and you say, wow, this is really interesting. I want to dig deeper to understand more around lighting, for example, or the shape of the plow. And you can do that with the algorithm, point it towards different data sources, and do follow-on studies to see how the needs have evolved over time, 6 months and 12 months, and really refresh your data. So 3 of the 117 insights that we identified in this particular VOC you'll see that we've categorized the needs into topic areas. In this example, lights, sidewalks, and spreader. There's informative content. Artem showed you the Amazon review from before. This is what the machine analyzed, so those phrases. And then the insight that our team of analysts generated from that content. So let's look at the spreader example here. The informative content that we learned, the top box keeps my tools safe and dry. Do they still have plastic wheels? Good spreader, but wheels keep cracking. So lots of nuanced insights about the wheels there. The need is, I'm assured that the wheels on my spreader are durable, they won't crack. Okay, so we can generate needs from this information, it's great. When we presented our client with this information, they were quite pleased, and I have more of this on the next slide, but the benefit of the method is that it presented them with needs that they had a good sense that they would hear, right? When any of us do VOC, that typically happens. Maybe on the range of 80% of what you hear, you had some sense that your customers might bring that up, right? So that showed that the methodology was valid, right? I'm actually hearing these customer needs that I would expect to hear in my category, but there were needs that they hadn't heard, or different ways of thinking about product features that they were able to uncover with the method. And I have to say that the biggest need was related to visibility and lighting. So what they uncovered was that when the plow was at a very sharp angle, it was blocking the light on the truck. And so the plow drivers had no visibility in that instance. In the next generation of their product, they fixed that and was incredibly successful and well received. That came from this initiative. Another powerful insight was around sidewalk plowing and the need to have very sharp parallel angles, something that the drivers and operators were struggling with. Not directly related to the product, we uncovered an insight around having the right de-icing material for the surfaces that they're working on, right? So if you're on asphalt, you need one material. If you're on concrete or gravel, you need another material. So that's not the plow itself, but still a useful insight for the client to have. And lastly, some insights around the surfaces that the plows will be working on. So in this case, a person was talking about how when they plow in parking lots, they can't mess up the paint because if they do, then they're on the hook for fixing it. Again, that's not necessarily directly related to the product, but it's something they have to think about in their design so that these plow drivers aren't left having to foot the bill for fixing parking lots where they, mess up the paint. So I said a bit about how the client reacted to this study. It was successful. A mix of known and unknown insights, which is great, is what we want to see in any good VOC. Cost and time effective, right? If you think about scheduling your VOC interviews, I know Vanessa and I were talking about this before, it's incredibly time consuming to conduct the interviews and do the analysis. We still do that a lot, like I said, but in this case, the user-generated content was available, we extracted it, we were able to get the needs in a fraction of the time. And the results were objective, right? Like Gerry said, moment of truth. People go on these forums, they have a question, they have a problem, they have a feeling, they have an emotion, they express that, we can extract it and analyze it. Second case study, and then I'll turn things back over to Artem to talk about the future of AI for VOC. We partnered with a company that was looking to innovate in the diabetes space. So this is a medical example. Specifically, this company manufactures glucose monitors, and they recognized an opportunity to improve and innovate. I mean, millions of people daily are checking their glucose levels. And so they wanted to uncover customer needs in that category. There's a lot of patient insights online. There's a lot of forums and spaces for patients to safely collaborate together, right? So we looked at thousands of posts on forums and blogs, many specifically related to diabetes, e-commerce sites as well. There's lots of reviews available for these glucose monitors where patients were expressing their opinions, and social media sites as well. Lots of reviews and posts that we were able to extract from there. Social media can be tricky. I often have clients wanting to use sources like Instagram, for example. It's good that the machine can sift through a lot of clutter, but oftentimes we find that posts on sites like Instagram are very short. sometimes just expressing some like or dislike to a particular image. And so just a word of caution when you're thinking about social media sites, we want to make sure that customers are talking about their needs when we take that content.
Is there a step here for making sure that the sources you're crawling are aligned to the target markets of the customer? So you might get completely different insight from a demographic that, a company might not even be targeting as a primary demographic.
Yeah, that's a great question. So for the people online, how are we making sure that the insights are from the right places? What we're trying to do at this phase of the research is really get that comprehensive list of customer needs. I'm going to talk about a next step right after this, which quantifies and validates that with their target market of interest. But I'd say if people are talking about it online and it's related to your product, there's some benefit of hearing it. Measuring its criticality to keep targets would come next. All right, so lots of information from various sources. The machine can handle it. So again, similar format to the snowplow case study, we have the user-generated content, right, that rich verbatim, the needs, and then the categories. So here you can see the needs that we uncovered span categories like accuracy, connectivity, which was a huge category for this particular study, and interface and features. So some nuanced needs here. Let's take an example of the interface and features category. So you have the customer here expressing both work in the same way and are easy to use. The GE100 has a bit of an advantage if the tester has lost some dexterity with the fingers, right? So here they are talking about a very specific segment of the customer. Lancets and test strips are a little larger and easier to handle than the test strips and lancets of the Ultra 2, right? So very detailed feedback here. We're able to formulate that into a customer need that's simply glucose monitor and accessories are easy to use, even for those with limited dexterity. Okay, so lots of needs uncovered here. What we did in this case is we didn't stop at the qualitative needs identification. So this is beyond machine learning at this point. This is a quantitative survey, and as Gerry mentioned, in VOC, it's well known that best practice is to prioritize the needs, right? We know we can't focus on everything, so let's go back to customers and understand, hey, is this really something that's critical for you, and also how well are you being served by the products and brands that you know? So we did exactly that. We put together a short web survey. We surveyed about 300 individuals with diabetes. We made sure that the individuals were in the client's segments of interest, right? Age range. They test at least once a week. They could really react to these needs. And we could also understand their opinions on various brands, right? So we can ask them, how is Dexcom performing? How does that compare to your experiences with Abbott? And what that allows us to do is understand the opportunities in a more strategic way, and this may look familiar to many of you, but it's a plot of importance and performance, right? We know as product developers, we can't focus on everything. We need to treat the needs differently, and so just very quickly, the needs in the upper left, this is really where we want to ideate the focus. These are needs that the customer is telling us, hey, this is really important to me. I'm not well served by your product or by the market. This tells me that we need to find a better solution, right? There's minimum requirements. I want to know those. Those are the minimums that in my glucose monitor I must have in the next generation, but maybe I'm not going to put my team of engineers on really solving or innovating on those needs. They just need to be there. There are needs that are overemphasized, right? Those are always good to monitor. Could we mine resources? Could we stop talking about some things in our marketing messaging, right? And then hidden opportunities. These are tricky. Needs that fall here sometimes really are not that important, but other times these are needs where maybe the customer can't quite imagine a solution that would solve that for them, but if you could, that would really delight the customer, and in the future you would gain a disruption or competitive advantage. So last slide here, this is a little small, I apologize, but just wanted to show you these 22 needs arrayed here on this matrix and explain a bit how it helped the client to really prioritize their efforts. So you see that when we affinitize the needs, we had higher level buckets of things like accuracy and durability, compatibility, connectivity, which I mentioned before, customer service, of course, the interface and features themselves, mobility and portability, purchase and instructions, as well as usage. And so the minimum requirements, these provide some validity to our data, right? So a simple and easy to use device. Yes, of course it must be simple and easy to use. The focus areas were interesting though. We had a need about the external conditioning or the external conditions not impacting the accuracy of the monitor. That was something that was relatively important to customers, but not well served. The wasting of test strips, right? People don't want to buy extra test strips. They don't want to waste those. Not feeling the puncture from the Lancet. Now you might look at this and say that's impossible. How would I ever solve for that in a non-continuous monitor? But maybe you could, right? It's worth thinking about how you could innovate on some of these focus area needs. In the hidden opportunities, we saw a lot of those connectivity needs, right? So knowing that the technology is compatible, that the data are safe, or even thinking outside the box and saying, can I track or monitor my other conditions with this monitor as well? So some of those more forward-thinking, technology-related needs, we saw fall in that area. But overall, successful application of the model, and it was really interesting to take that next step to quantitative measurement. So with that, I'm gonna go ahead and hand things over to Artem to wrap up and talk about where we're going next.
Thank you. Well, guys, I want to talk a little bit about the GPT models, large language models. You've heard enough of that today, I guess. And but that will be the last time before we depart. So it's great. I'm using GPT models quite a lot. Part of my job at Northwestern is teaching. And so on Monday, I will be teaching a case which was written in the 90s. And I was looking for an example of, well, can you find an example of a firm struggling with the same issues as this firm in the 90s? And I just asked this question to ChatGPT, and it came up with fantastic examples and quite detailed. So I had to go back and verify some of the details, but it looked great. Like 3 out of 4 worked. So I will see how the students react on Monday, but I'm excited about those examples. I was also, another example that I wanted to give you. So I'm new to this community. I'm really excited to meet all of you. I hope that we'll have some opportunity to chat after this presentation. But as a new person to this community, I asked ChatGPT, so what are the 4 good topics for ISBM meeting on AI? And ChatGPT gave me these 4 interesting ideas. So the first one, AI enhanced customer insights. I was like, yes, that's us. Ethical considerations in AI for B2B marketing. I think it's great. I'm not sure it's covered today, but I think it's just a very important topic. AI-powered personalization. I saw on our agenda it will be covered tomorrow. And then AI in sales and customer relationship management. So that's, I'm not sure that it's covered, but it's great, reasonable topics. And I didn't provide anything more. It was just exactly what I have there in the title of the slides. I didn't provide any more detail. But for those topics, it even gave me a few talking points. Here is something that you want to discuss. And I'm not showing it on this slide, but at the end of the answer by ChatGPT, it told me, if you really want to grab attention at this audience, you want to provide some cases and good examples. And I'm like, sounds good. That's like, yes. Yeah, so it's ChatGPT is really impressive. And so I was wondering, well, how can we use it for voice of the customer beyond what we have done before? And so I want to give you just one example. This is a customer review, and this is from one of the studies that AMS did for a client. It's for a telehealth company. And so here's what the customer says. Healthcare workers can see people that just needed a prescription, as lots of people used to tie up others in the doctor's office just to get a prescription or renewal. So when you look at this customer review, what kind of customer needs can we identify? Well, here are a couple of examples. Feel like I'm less of a burden on the current healthcare system. This is one. And another one, able to get a prescription without having to visit the doctor's office. I mean, both of these customer needs, you can see that it's a nice conceptualization what customer is talking about. They're somewhat different. They're focused on different sides of the experience and kind of different types of benefits customers might obtain. but both are completely reasonable, and both are completely based on what the customer says here. The interesting thing here is that the first one is formulated by AMS, and the second one is formulated by a GPT large language model. So when I'm looking at that, it's like, well, imagine like formulating customer need. This is the most cognitively challenging part of the process in VOC. This is like when we read those customer feedback transcripts or online content, this is the most challenging part that we're actually dealing with. This is where we spend most of our time. And ChatGPT can do it quite well. Well, it's actually not ChatGPT. So I want to, this is very preliminary research, but I wanted to share a few observations. Well, first of all, we find that large language models can formulate customer needs quite efficiently. And it's interesting, they're not just able to formulate something which is quite reasonable for the context, they're able to formulate needs which are sufficiently specific and sufficiently detailed that we can actually use them in product development. Like the examples that you saw before, it was not just ease of use or durability. It was not high level kind of aggregate or very generic term. No, it was very specific about the customer experience and the benefits that customers want to obtain. The second thing that I would like to highlight here is foundational models and open source large language models like ChatGPT. They are quite impressive when you play with them enough, but when you look for the specific applications like this one, formulating customer needs, they're quite bad. Like, I mean, I could cherry pick some examples from ChatGPT, but frankly, it's just bad. In most cases, they would output something very, very generic, something high level, which is completely useless for our purposes. I mean, sometimes they can formulate, but it would be like 1 out of 20 reasonable examples, and most of the cases would be just bad. So the example that you saw in the previous slide, this is a different model. Basically, we took one of the foundational models. And what we really had to teach this model is what the customer need is. Basically, for that purpose, we took a lot of experience that AMS has. And AMS conducted lots of studies, most of the customer studies for different clients. So we looked at those customer needs that they identified. And we basically provided as an example, this is a good customer need. That's how customer needs look for different product categories. And so by teaching the model how the customer need look, what is the customer need? Right? This distinction that Gerry, for example, was talking about, customer need versus solution, most of the models just don't know that. And so by providing those examples and actually fine-tuning the model for our specific application, that's how we achieve much better success. The last thing that I would like to highlight with this example is that there is still a lot of synergies that we are looking for, right? Humans are still needed in this process. I mean, when we think about what this GPT model did for us, right? It formulated customer needs quite well, and it formulates customer needs which are specific, and it does the hard part of the process, the cognitively challenging part of formulating and conceptualizing the customer experience. It does great, but still, you know, we still have to apply human judgment to understand, well, what are the limitations? How well does it apply to our context? How good the output is? What can we really trust it, right? And also we need to provide what is the good information. So if you just start asking GPT models, so what are the customer needs for oral care products? It will come up with very generic stuff. Like whiter teeth will be kind of the best of it. But if you are looking for the detailed things, we want to provide it with more content, and the content has to be curated. So this curation of content, sometimes it might be the interview transcript, sometimes it might be curated content from online conversations, but this is somewhere where the humans can guide the model better. I really like the question that Corey asked about, you know, well, can we trust that this is a representative sample of our target audience? Well, we have lots of issues with online content, right? A lot of people are just writing stuff just to write stuff. They're faking things, and they are not, we cannot really trust a lot of things. But if our goal is just to formulate a whole comprehensive list of customer needs, that might be fine. Because after that, we take all these customer needs that we identified online, we bring it to the focus groups, and we bring it to the actual target customers that we care about, and we help them, we work with them to evaluate the outputs of the methods. So the same thing happens with ChatGPT. Like if you start thinking about using large language models to evaluate which customer needs are more important and where we actually place our product development efforts? Bad idea. Bad idea. ChatGPT is learning from open source, and you don't know even where it's learning from. It has completely shifted priorities. No way it's going to work. And so a lot of human part in this process and the synergies that I'm talking about is about understanding the limitations of this technology, fundamental limitations. So things like prioritization of innovation, no way ChatGPT can do it for us. But formulating customer needs, apparently it's quite capable of. All right, so I know that I'm the last thing that stands between you and the drinks. So let me just...
No, it's Rand, so don't worry.
Oh, it's
It's
right?
Rand.
Perfect, perfect. So we'll have more time for questions. Just to summarize quickly, we really spent a lot of effort over the last 7 years. We are working on these new methods, how we can facilitate and improve voice of the customer using AI. Quite a lot of success, and a lot of the success, I mean, in my research group, we developed the foundation of the technology, but then AMS got a lot of practice, and it's really a lot of art that also comes in the process and how you actually apply those methods and develop them going forward on the particular applications. So a lot of success. I really encourage you to look into it. And then still, even if you're talking about the newest technology, large language models, I know it's a lot of hype about it, and particularly in this room and this meeting today and tomorrow. There are limitations to this technology, and we want to be thinking about, and we want to be cautious about understanding those limitations, because the decisions that we make, they have to account for them, right? It's the final decisions that managers make in this context. It's the human decisions. Models can't make those decisions for us, but they can guide us. They can serve as a very effective co-pilot. And so I want you to be thinking about using AI and what are the different applications, not trying to replace humans from the process, but actually to facilitate our efforts and serve as an effective co-pilot. All right, let me stop at that, and I'll open it for more questions. Gerry, do you want to join us too?
Now, you had said that ChatGPT can help summarize like customer reviews. How does that work? And then you mentioned customized solutions.
Yeah, sorry.
Can I take a transcript of an interview and paste that into ChatGPT and summarize that? Or?
Yeah, so I was using ChatGPT, large language model, interchangeably. I think I read just too much popular press on that. No, so with ChatGPT, we didn't have much success. With custom models, the fine-tuned models, where we actually take the large language model and fine-tune it with what customer need is, this is where we see a lot of success.
Stephen, I'll add to that, when we do the customer interview, that's proprietary information, and we would never put something like that in ChatGPT because of the security. I don't know that companies would want to either. So these are closed models that
Yes. I forgot to mention that. So This is really important. So ChatGPT was exposed to public and received a lot of attention about a year ago, November last year. And OpenAI, they give you a promise that they will not use your data without explicit consent. I'm not sure whether I trust this promise a lot. But also there are many solutions, and OpenAI might be a good company, but there are other companies that might be using this data. So what really happened over the last year is that a large academic community and also a lot of people working just open source with open source software, they put a lot of effort into making those models easier to be implemented locally. So when you think about large language models like ChatGPT or Llama or Bard by Google, those models, you cannot do the primary estimation of them locally. It requires lots of compute resources. But once the model is estimated, now you can actually just download it, and you can implement them and fine-tune them on your local machines without ever connecting the machine to the internet. So this whole thing can now be more confidential and secure.
Just to add, Steve, let's say there was a category where there was 0 user-generated content out there. We would still have to do all of the interviewing ourselves, but it would save the part of reading all those transcripts. It would do that part of the process for you.
Awesome.
And the combination of the two is, hey, we think so.
Yeah, no one likes
But there are closed models you can download and tweak and then run it through there.
You can download anything you want into this private model.
which was quite impressive. Like when it just when it was just published and became public, I was like, oh, that's a huge model. How come? I mean, today I run it in my office, like on a regular desktop. It's not even a corporate server, it's just a desktop in my office. And not just run those models, I fine-tune those models on my desktop. It's quite impressive what we achieved. And it's been a large open source community that's working on that.
When you say tune that model, are you just feeding it context for who you are and what you're looking for, or are you modifying the code in the backend?
So you don't need to modify the code. What you need to modify is, well, if you're familiar with the idea of the neural networks in general, right? Basically, a model with huge number of parameters. Fine-tuning the model means you update those parameters a little bit. Well, you don't do it manually. You provide examples, and the model uses some statistics to update those parameters.
How much data are you feeding into?
So this is an interesting question. Again, when I first saw this whole idea, I was like, it would require a huge amount of data. I mean, when we think about ChatGPT, it was trained on something like 5 billion words of like sentences. It's just a tremendous number, unbelievably big number. To fine-tune the model, all you need is like 5,000 examples. Like really, I mean, that becomes feasible. It might be harder if you're just trying to write down those examples for your particular category. But as a researcher, I'm really enjoying my collaboration with MS because these guys, they have a lot of examples of customer needs for different product categories. And so sometimes now when we go to a different new product category that we haven't seen before, we don't even need to update the model again. The model already knows what the customer need is. It doesn't require more fine-tuning.
So you mentioned in the B2B space, customer reviews are non-existent. I mean, they're very hard to find. Especially, I'm in the industrial water space, so no one likes to talk about that. Not sexy, and also there's infrastructure ramifications, right? When you have the problem with the water system, people are gonna freak out. So how do you gather that data that you can put into a large language model?
It's a good question. I mean, very rarely is there nothing, and there's probably some forums, right, maybe that you could gain a piece of it. But in that case, we'd have to look at proprietary internal data sources that you might have, call center data, chatbot data, CRM data, things like that. Or we may well need to do traditional interviews, and you might just need that information. It's entirely possible that all of the data aren't there.
I'll add an interesting story. I once commented, if you know anything about the oil field services business, had a client there, and it's a war between the three big guys. Who is it? Schlumberger, Halliburton, and the last one, I forget. But at any rate, it's a war, and they don't talk online. And I once made the comment, well, there's probably no user-generated comment there, and this guy stopped me and said, "You have no idea. During the Deepwater Horizon accident in the Gulf, all of these petroleum engineers were going on with pseudonyms and having huge discussions about how to cap that well. And they said, there was, just for this one moment, there was an incredible amount of UGC, even though normally it never would."
The other source that comes to mind too, and I don't know if this would be applicable, but it is for some industries, is there's an increasing number of YouTube video tutorials and the commentary. I mean, you've got a lot of interesting content in that commentary, but there's also customer needs that people have even in the comments of those tutorial videos, which do exist in a lot of categories.
What is kind of the shelf life when you do download that local copy to then run, avoiding putting the sensitive information out there when you have to re-download and update, as things evolve, as things change over time? Is there a shelf life or, where you need to, hey, every 3 months, we need to probably re-download or something?
Are you talking about just to clarify, are you asking about the shelf life of the algorithm or the model, or the shelf life of the VOC insights, or both?
I guess kind of both, because if you're bringing in a local, then there's no, that's kind of in a vacuum now. whereas no new stuff is coming in as time goes by.
I can speak to the VOC aspect of it. I'll let Artem speak to the model specifically. The answer is it depends. I had a client recently that was impacted by a new health regulation that came out, and in his case, we needed to be running the machine learning analysis on the online content every 3 or 4 weeks because there was new content and also new sentiment around brands. I didn't talk about this in the case examples that we discussed today, but another layer is looking at not just the needs, but when people are expressing these needs, what sentiment are they expressing? If they're talking about a brand, if they're talking about my brand, are they talking about it in a positive light or a negative light? And so that was one of the big things that we wanted to look at there was, okay, are there new needs? Maybe, maybe not, but how are brands being talked about when we see these new regulations? So it depends.
Okay.
How much new chatter is out there? But with the model, it's relatively easy to get refreshed information over time.
Yeah, it's interesting that you're talking about this customer insights, and sometimes you want to download more data. I mean, one of the kind of big objectives of our research group is, can we create something like weekly customer insights for your business?
Yeah.
Well, weekly customer insights, at least before, it required that, well, even if we scrape the content and we kind of select the pieces of content, it should not be just, a bunch of pieces of content. It should actually be the interpretation of it. And so I think our group right now is very excited about that opportunity of using GPT models for kind of continuous monitoring of customer insights and maybe some kind of satisfaction scores. Talking about the models in particular, so one thing that doesn't necessarily have to change is that, well, the definition of customer needs didn't change in the last 30 years. So as soon as you teach one model what customer need is, you kind of don't worry about that anymore. On the other hand, you recognize that about maybe once in a half a year, Facebook publishes another generation of the GPT model, of Llama model. And those models get more impressive. Frankly, I'm not sure how more impressive they are in the specialized tasks. So when we ask questions, have very general questions to them, and some of the tasks that people like journalists might ask them, yeah, those models get better. But if you're talking about the particular idea of customer need summarization, maybe not so much. And so that's one part of it. Another part of it is, well, downloading the model takes a lot of connection to the internet. But after that, updating the model and fine-tuning that I was talking about, well, frankly, it's done overnight. So even if you need to do it once a year, I don't think it actually requires a full-time employee for that.
Thank you.
Yes.
Just a question related to how you're applying customer segmentation, because you're kind of going out there, kind of casting a wide net, and then there's the prioritization piece of like, okay, well, how do we really kind of filter for what's important for most us? How does that process work?
Yeah, that's a great question. Customer segmentation is something that we have found that these models aren't very good at yet, right? What we have found that it is really successful at is identifying that comprehensive set of needs across a broad audience. To understand segment priorities, that would be done in a more traditional way in a quantitative survey. You can type your segments, so typically with any segmentation scheme you have, you'll have a typing tool where you can place customers into a segment based on what they're like, and then see how they react to the needs, see what's a priority for them. But really, we've, in our experience, done the segmentation and using more traditional quantitative methods. Good question.
How are you all accounting for accuracy of the information?
Can you clarify that question?
Yeah, so for example, the example of it doesn't have the 30-second time anymore. You're making an assumption that that is a note on, I'd like to know how long I need to brush my teeth. Is there a chance that we're missing out on what the need could be or actually appropriate? So what if get more information from the user on what that is?
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah. So at this point, just well, academic job requires me to publish papers, which means going through the rigorous review reports and this process of publication is just pain. I hope that the project that I presented today will be published 3 or 4 years from now. It's like, imagine what kind of product life cycle I'm talking about.
We all have those kinds of project license, right?
Yeah, so what we currently do, at least in academic research, is that we assume that professional companies like AMS will review interviews, focus groups, online content for us, and what they identify in this content would be a gold standard. And then we compare whatever machine can do to what they can do. Sometimes machine can do some additional things, and then we would evaluate it separately, whether it's good, whether it's not good. And so right now, as we are talking, there is a team at AMS actually working with our team at MIT on rigorously evaluating what I was talking about. And this evaluation involves quite a lot of content, but also different product categories, quite different. Like we're talking like from oral care to activewear to some of the B2B examples. It's just, yeah.
I want to add something to that. When I was speaking up front, I said customers tend to talk about features. Well, the feature was the 30-second buzzer, or the 2-minute buzzer or something. Now, a good interviewer would learn to probe on that. What does that do for you? Why would that be better? And we can probably get the customer to say the need that Artem presented. Well, I know how long I need to brush. Failing that, a lot of times, we teach our analysts, sometimes you have to do a little author's license, and you have to take the risk of making the interpretation of what the customer was talking about, even though they never quite said it themselves. In an ideal world, we'd be able to go on and do another interview and get them to say it, but it's never an ideal world.
I think it's actually, you might be thinking about it as a downside of online content, or you might be thinking about it as an advantage of online content. Because in the interviews, if the customer didn't say something, you can go back to this customer and follow up. But in online content, well, you kind of find the topic or what they're talking about, and then you can search more on this topic. And once in a, you spend some time and you figure out why they're talking about that. So you might be thinking about it from both sides.
Next question. There's a lot of content in some of my BP markets that I work in. There's a lot of podcasts and YouTube videos and things like that. Is it possible to get transcripts of some of that stuff and put it into the model?
Yeah, the model can deal with all different types of text, whether it's somebody reporting on a story or even social media posts or reviews, so absolutely.
All right, folks, we've been asked twice for the last question. Let's actually keep moving.